Welcome back, Life Sciences. That break again, make good use. Go and have some water, go and get the legs stretching, and most importantly, get that oxygen back into the body so the mind can work a lot more clearer. Okay, so the road that we followed so far when we've looked at the whole concept of gaseous exchange, right? We've looked at what gaseous exchange is. When I talk about gaseous exchange, we realized that it has a lot more than just breathing in and breathing out. So far we've looked at the concept of how different organisms are able to get gases in and out. We looked at how the whole structure of the mammal. So we've got this lungs, we've got tubes, we've got air that has to come in, it goes through all these tubes, and we look at the whole structure of the lungs. And then we looked at how we get air into and out of the body, called breathing. And then we also looked how oxygen and carbon dioxide, how we got it from our lungs into our body and from our body out again. And we also looked at how much we breathe. And we quite were staggered by the volumes, the liters of how much our lungs are actually able to do. This part, however, comes to, I won't say the unpleasant part, but we're actually going to look at what happens when our lungs or parts of our gaseous exchange surface do not work as well, when we have certain diseases, or we have certain conditions. And remember, all of this is going to lead us to battle to breathe, not to breathe properly. So very often when we look at the diseases, how does it affect our ability to take oxygen in and our ability to release carbon dioxide? Again, there are a few terms on the board, Basically, the terms that I've put there are the different diseases or the conditions that we are going to look at. Some we're going to see are quite severe, and some are just everyday, ordinary things that just might be a little bit unpleasant for us. Now, the first disease that I've got on the board is the one you need to link with microorganisms, So when we get to tuberculosis or TB, we can link it to the first part of the syllabus when we looked at this whole concept of what a microorganism is. Now, TB is a bacteria that you can see over here, and how we get it, somebody who has got TB, the bacteria goes and sits in the lungs. Now, we have looked at it before when we looked at microorganisms, but as we said, a person that is healthy, the lungs, the bacteria is going to sit in a capsule in the lungs. But as soon as the person becomes immune suppressed, what we mean is the immune system is not working so well, the bacteria are going to start to divide. Now that you've looked at the whole concept of what the lungs do, you need to understand that as soon as there's an infection in the lungs, what are we going to start to do? We're going to start to cough. How does our body respond to these infections? It produces mucus. How do we need to get the mucus out? We start to cough, And what happens what is the bacteria doing? It's destroying the lining of the cells. So when we cough, we might have blood. Also, remember, if my lungs are infected, that affects how much oxygen I'm coming in. So I'm tired, I don't have as much energy. So usually those are going to be the symptoms that we're going to see for most of the respiratory diseases. This concept of fatigue, that I'm tired, and the reason being I'm not getting that oxygen in. Now, the next one we look at, and some of you might have it, is what we call asthma. Now, if we look at our tubes, I want to show you here. The lining of the tubes, not the lining of the lungs, and this is really important that you understand that, because our lungs don't have muscles. If you have a look here, we've got a nice lining, and we need that lining because we need to cough. We need to get things that are irritating out of our tubes. But what happens if the lining, tightens? What happens if the muscle constricts? Now you also see that what might happen is, look at this mucus layer, it's also thicker, so the person might get asthma from being sick, right? The person might get asthma from doing too much exercises, and simply what happens is when the muscle closes, it cuts off the lining, all right? So what happens if you're an asthmatic, the tubes, remember the flow of air, the tubes must be open. As soon as it closes, guys, what am I not getting in? I'm not getting in oxygen. And if you've seen somebody who has asthma, they're trying so hard to breathe and they can't. So what you will see normally, right, is asthmatics usually have an inhaler. And what that inhaler is when they inhale, it's got little chemicals, and because we've got the tubes, can go directly to it, and one of them will be a muscle relaxant. So, because what is the problem, right? The muscle relaxant, and that's the tubes closed. I don't know if you've ever known, some of them also have cortisone in, and that cortisone stops the inflammation. And it's not healthy if you don't have asthma to have somebody's asthmatic inhaler. There's a different kinds of inhalers. When you're sick, you can also get an inhaler, but it's different from those who have asthma. Okay, sometimes children grow out of it, right? But if you do have asthma, you'll see most of the time they'll have that inhaler with them. Oh, hay fever. Right, this is not obviously as dangerous as an asthmatic attack or tuberculosis, but what it does is it's an irritation. So for some of us, what happens is we've got little things we call rhinitis, right? That's basically a snotty nose, because if you sniff, you do sound like a rhino, right? So what happens here, you have maybe triggers, and pollen is a good trigger. And basically what happens when you have these triggers is they move into your system, all right, and you have this overreaction of things that are going to occur. So it goes into your nose, so that's when you breathe through our nose, okay, and what is going to happen here is our body is going to produce rhinitis, this whole lot of mucus. Our body is going to produce this whole lot of mucus. So what happens is we have like a blocked nose, right? But also that mucus is going to cause a bit of an irritation. So we're going to have a snotty nose, but also what it starts to happen is we start to sneeze and we have all this itchiness and it's just terrible. So what we usually have for it is the chemist or wherever, we have an antihistamine. Right, so what the antihistamine does is just try to get rid of all this mucus, stop the sneezing. I don't know, maybe your eyes water, but generally there's a lot of this in spring when the flowers start to produce the pollen. So nothing really serious, but if you do suffer from it, it's actually quite annoying. There's nothing worse than sneezing and a runny nose and a runny eyes, etc. All right, so when we start to look at other diseases, all right, I'm sure a lot of you have had this one, and this is called bronchitis. All right, so if we break the words down, if we look at bronchi are our tubes, all right, so when we looked at the trachea, there's the trachea, and our trachea divided into two tubes called our bronchi. Now, if we have a look at the one bronchus, two bronchi, if again we have a look at the lining, okay, we're going to see here's a nice open tube. Now, what will happen here, this is going to be a bacterial infection. And that bacterial infection, right, likes mucus. Guys, you need to understand that bacteria love our mucus linings. You will see when you have like pneumonia. Pneumonia is also bacterial infection that affects the lungs. And what does it do? It lines the mucus lining. So what happens is when the bacteria, all right, affect a normal lining, it's going to make a lot and lots of mucus. So what's going to happen is you are probably going to cough a lot, and that is why doctors often ask, is it a dry cough? Is it a wet cough? They listen to your back or to see how your lungs are breathing, because very often any kind of infection. So you've got all this mucus and it starts to, you have to cough it out, you have to get rid of it. But what can happen is that bacterial infection, if you don't treat it, and treating it usually, it's a bacteria, we can use antibiotics. If you don't treat it, that bacteria actually can go into your lungs and then it can develop pneumonia. And pneumonia is where you really battle to breathe because your lungs, you're making so much mucus. And remember, the mucus, that means oxygen has to move through all of that mucus to get to your body, and that the carbon dioxide needs to get through all that mucus. So when you breathe, you actually have difficulty breathing because of all this snot, if I have to use that word, that mucus that is accumulating in your body. But I'm sure a lot of you, if you do, as I said, bronchitis, you will have antibiotics in order to cure that. The next one is the next two are actually quite serious, all right? The first one is called emphysema, all right? And what it does, or constrictive, all right, pulmonary disease. So usually this occurs in people that have been quite heavy smokers. And if you have a look at the diagram over here, what happens is the smoking, if you're a really heavy smoker, what you actually destroy the lining of the alveoli. So here's a nice alveoli, nice and healthy. Here you've basically destroyed the lining. So if you've destroyed the lining, there is no way for the oxygen to go. And there's no cure for this. All right, you cannot, they can kind of treat it. You'll see a lot of people who might have this eventually have to go on to oxygen, right? But when they breathe, it sounds almost like a death rattle. They really battle to get oxygen into their body, as I said, and there's no cure for this, right? It's usually your alveoli have been destroyed. You can't get it back again, and you are going to, people obviously die from this. I know my grandfather, right, had emphysema, and he did pass away from that. Guys, and the last one is lung cancer, right? There's a lot of irritations. We might smoke or no smokers, or have things in the air, pollution in the air. And what do these little things do? They go called carcinogens. They go into our lungs and they can cause our cells to grow mutatively, and we form tumors. That's what they are. And because our lungs are so close to our blood, what happens is, right, that cancer can go into the bloodstream, and as we know, cancer then can move to the different parts of the body. Yes, you can have chemo, radiation, or they might operate. You might be able to cure it, but as I said, when it comes to the lungs, the chances of it spreading are quite good. Okay, guys, I'm afraid that's all we have for today. Until next time, cheerio, bye.